Okay, so hopefully everybody is able to hear me. My name is Tomás Mac Conmara. I am an oral historian from County Clare, and I'm also the director of MacConmara Consulting, who were brought aboard with Waterford City and County Libraries back in 2018 to develop the Diverse Waterford Oral History Project. And since then, I've been fortunate enough to be working with Sinead O'Higgins, Joanne Rothwell, the archivist, and of course Jane Cantwell, the county librarian as well, in developing a methodology and a program that can assist and support the documentation of oral heritage in Waterford. And I suppose this online lecture, which is short, 20-minute piece, will hopefully illuminate the value of oral history, the value of stories, memories, tradition in Waterford, the importance of documenting those, the importance of recording those, and to shine a light on the key skills involved, I suppose, and why the programme Diverse Waterford Oral History is so important, and why people across the city and county of Waterford hopefully should engage with it. There has been real positive response to it since 2019 when we went public with the methodology, and we're certainly hoping that more and more people will engage. We'll take on the support, and I'll explain a little bit more shortly as to what exactly is involved in that. But certainly after the 20 minutes today, I would hope that anybody viewing this will go away with, even a slightly deeper appreciation for oral history as a source and as a resource to the people of Waterford, but also oral history, the method, oral history, the approach to that documentation, and why acquiring those key skills are really important, and most importantly of all, going out actually collecting the material is what's critical. And now you have in the Diverse Waterford Oral History Project, you have the methodology, you have the resources, and you have the support to go and do that. The commitment required, of course, is to commit to an idea that is, I suppose, a collective action for Waterford. So as opposed to just collecting in Williamstown, for example, the notion is that by subscribing to the Diverse Waterford methodology, that whatever happens in any part of Waterford is collected according to the best standards possible, and it's also then centralized and archived properly so that it's there for current generations and future generations, which I know as an oral historian and as a consultant that has worked all over the country on oral history projects and in different parts of the world. I've seen where tremendous work has been done by individuals or groups in collecting memory and oral history, and then unfortunately that material gets lost or gets shelved, and unfortunately very few people, if any, get to actually hear it. And that's such a pity, considering, first the effort that the individual or group went to, but secondly, the value within the tapes or the reel-to-reels or even digital recordings as they may be, is never impressed on the people generally. And I think the true value of Diverse Waterford is that it will ensure that material that is gathered will be there in 50 years time, or even in 100 years time when we're all gone, and the material is there which connects us to the time it was collected and also to previous generations. And that will be a theme that will come up right across the next 17 minutes or so at this stage. So first of all, I'm going to screen share here, which will just take a second, but just to give a sense through the presentation. I wanted to talk a little bit about Samhain, because we're obviously just entering now into a period of importance in terms of our broader folkloric culture and tradition. And Samhain, celebrating the end of the harvest, and I suppose welcoming in the darker period of the year, was always a really important part of Irish culture, stretching back 2,000 years, and conjures up a whole range of traditions and customs, some of which will be within the memory of older people in Waterford. Some will be still in existence, and others then will have died out, which is always unfortunate. But we have a kind of a window now in terms of our generation in 2020 and beyond to try and capture in some ways the embers of some of those traditions, and in some cases track the way others have survived and others have died out as well. But certainly traditions like the jack-o'-lantern would have been strong in Waterford, without question. the two key stories with regard to the jack-o'-lantern. They're worth repeating, although many are aware of it, but one links directly to that old tradition of bonfires as part of the Samhain festival, and that the people attending them would bring home, excuse me, a light from the fire, which would be again bringing home some of that celebration, some of that welcoming home or welcoming of the winter. And there would be luck attached to that for the year ahead or for the winter ahead. And that would usually be brought home according to the tradition in a hollowed out turnip. And the hollowed out turnip connects us to the second story of Jack-o'-lantern, who was this 18th century Irish blacksmith who was denied entry into heaven because of his past deeds, and went to the devil for a light, having been told by God that he had to wander the earth for all eternity. And having gotten a burning coal from the devil, he wandered around Ireland, certainly, for eternity. And people would eventually put out a hollowed out turnip with a light to protect them against jack-o'-lantern. And it's funny the way Irish immigrants have brought that to America and brought that really strongly, and that now is manifest in the use of pumpkins, which is obviously a global phenomenon that everybody would relate to, but mightn't understand that it links to a very old Irish tradition that went with the memory of the Irish immigrants to America, and then became, I suppose, commercialized now, but certainly much more popularized in recent years. So that's an example, I suppose, of a tradition that has survived. But the tradition and the enactment of that tradition was really critical, but also the memory of it was really important. But other ones that we would relate to, like the barnbrack, for example, the speckled loaf, is something we're well aware of in terms of the fortune-telling nature of it, the different elements that would be found from the ring for marriage, the pea for poverty, the rags, that you'd end up in rags for within a short period. A coin would generally mean enrichment in a short period of time, and with one case where a stick was supposed to indicate that the man, if it was a man found it, was to beat his wife, which obviously is a fairly negative tradition, but it's not the only one associated with stick. It's just one interpretation, a particularly, I suppose, malevolent tradition in that sense. But the picking the cabbage blindfolded is another tradition I know that was certainly extant in Waterford back in the 20s and 30s, and that would be where girls would go and pick cabbage with a blindfold on, and if they picked the cabbage that had clay on the bottom of it, then their husband would be rich, and they would have to eat the cabbage and find out whether it would be bitter or sweet, and that would indicate whether their future husband would be bitter or sweet, etc. So this again was all of this kind of ability within the tradition to predict what would happen to the individual, and some people took it seriously, other people just took it as a tradition. And the clay, water and ring game was known in Waterford and throughout the country, of course, and most people would be familiar with that, although it's not a tradition that seems to exist nowadays. But the ring, of course, would mean you'd be married within 12 months. The water would mean you'd cross water within 12 months. And then finally, if you pick the saucer of clay, which again, you'd be blindfolded during this game, you pick the saucer of clay, it would mean you would be buried within 12 months. And I've seen examples, unfortunate examples of even in the Civil War, of men who were executed, and one particular man writing a letter, his last letter, saying that the previous November, he was executed in January, and the previous November he had picked the saucer of clay. So that tradition was extant, and there was a certain belief, I suppose, in them as well. So just I want to move on slightly to show you an example from Nellie Walsh in Dungarvan in 1938, when Nellie made a contribution to the 1938 school folklore scheme, which is of course a great example, or a great resource for any oral historian who wants to investigate the past through the use of memory, to get a sense of what was strong, what was in the memory of the people in 1938, which is not that far or that long ago. There's certainly something to consider. So we have here this contribution from Nellie where she talks about Culcanan, and in actual fact there's a reference to the fact that Halloween was called Culcanan night, it was called Amless night, and it was called Halloween night as well. So the Culcanan links to the tradition of making Culcanan as we would know it, but that a coin would be wrapped up in baking paper, and children who would find it in their Culcanan would be allowed to keep the coin. So again, there was a tradition and a game associated with even food in that context as well. So, but it was interesting that in 1938 there was the use of both Colcannon Night and Armless Night, which was about collecting alms, linking to Trick or Treat later, and then finally Halloween Night as we would know it. So moving on from Samhain, and I suppose just to finalise on that, it's really critical to understand that throughout the whole year, there are all of these calendar customs, which were really strong in the past. Some have survived, some have died out, but there are opportunities in any interview to document that. And also as well to in different parts of Waterford, if you're in Lismore or if you're in Waterford City or Villierstown or wherever you might be, there may be different traditions, there may be different adherence to those traditions, or they may have died out later, died out earlier, there'd be different belief systems. And I would always make the point that, when you go out and collect oral history about folk belief, and sometimes people say, well, that wasn't believed in our area, that's a piece of memory you've documented. And people often, become disillusioned or they're dismayed at the fact that there's no tradition in an area. The fact that you've documented a lack of tradition in an area is actually important. So just to make the point, oral historians down through the generations and folklorists of different ilks are always referring to the loss that is represented by a generation. And that was always the case. There was always that fear amongst oral historians and folklorists more so in the past. But in 900 AD, the following quote was written: "History records that the distinguished Bishop Cormac O'Cillenan, shortly after he ascended to the throne of Munster about 900 AD, compiled a glossary of old Irish words, which were then becoming obsolete." So 900 AD, there was a concern about what was being lost with regard to words. And right throughout the generations, there's always been that loss. But I do think we have to accept that in the generation we're living through, because of technological advancement, because of the way in which our communication sort of infrastructure has changed, or the way we acquire knowledge is so all-consuming. There's no question that, I suppose, change has come to define this period. It's not just that there's change, but change is the defining characteristic of our period. It's this constant fluidity that kind of maybe can lead to loss in some cases in terms of memory or tradition. So there was never a greater need for people to go out and document memory and tradition, particularly from our older people, so as to ensure that those aspects of our past are not lost, and more importantly, through Diverse Waterford, they're made available, that they're properly archived, properly catalogued, and then made available to the people in the future, which is really, really important. I have a very quick example from West Clare of the value of memory and oral history as a way of retrieving aspects that have been hidden in the past. And this is, as you can see, an image of a man and a woman in Loophead in the west of County Clare. And you can see from the caption, it's Mr. Costello and his blind wife. Now, this is a project that was undertaken at the time in the 1930s to catalogue or document vernacular cottages in the west of Ireland. And Mr. Costello and his blind wife was the caption put on this as part of the photographic documentation of this house in West Clare. And I used to see this in the County Museum in Ennis for many, many years, and always wondered about, the sort of reduction of the woman to the blind wife of Mr. Costello. But it transpired years later that, far from being just the blind wife of Mr. Costello, that she was actually a remarkable figure who Taiva Murraku, who you now see in front of you there, is a folklore collector, was a folklore collector for the Irish Folklore Commission. He spent many years travelling to Loophead to interview Breed Ban Icushtala, who was originally Breed Dunn from Kerry, who was one of the most remarkable storytellers of her time. And you can see from an insert into his diary when he met her for the last time, he said that we said goodbye to them then. We all had a great night, and I myself was lonesome when the time came to say goodbye to the elderly woman. It is unlikely that I will ever see her again, this noble elderly woman who accurately inherited the ancestral knowledge of her kin, the stories and the old world knowledge which she heard from the old people by the fireside when she was a young girl. There will never again be her likes in Loophead, this ushing after the Fianna. Now you consider that testimony to the character and the importance of Breed Ban Icushtala to this other representation of Mr. Costello and his blind wife. You can see how somebody who was attentive to the story that somebody could tell, or the memory that they bore, and the way in which they could capture that, record it for posterity, and shine light through that work on the value of an individual. All his oral historians, you as an oral historian, have the capacity to do the same thing. You know, we mightn't all be as fortunate to meet somebody like Breed Banny Custela, but each individual has their own contribution, have their own experiences. And I've never recorded anyone. I've recorded hundreds and hundreds of people. I've never recorded anybody who didn't have some value with regard to their memory, their tradition, their insight, or their general experience when it's recorded. So I'm going to briefly run through now some of the approaches to oral history, just to give people a general sense of what's involved. But critically, I suppose what I'm doing here in this next couple of minutes is to just show that it's approachable, because it can be done, and particularly through the diverse Waterford methodology that Sinead O'Higgins, Diane Rothwell, and Jane Cantwell have worked so hard on building. So the possibilities are certainly there. So the life cycle approach to oral history is generally the main approach. It's not the only one, but it's generally an approach that people that resonates with people, that they can engage with and understand in terms of the chronology, the general evolution of life, and the parallel experience with that. There are elements involved in all of this around ethics and legalities, which again, you know, need to be known, but they're not too challenging to get over when somebody adopts an ethical position, when somebody is doing it right and is informed on what they're doing, is doing it according to a standard. And again, Diverse Waterford offers this standard, offers this methodology that can ensure that the ethics, the legalities, and all of that is essentially taken care of. I want to show you at this point, just briefly, to give you an image to reassure you with regard to the resources that are available. I'm putting up, doesn't seem to be coming up at the moment here, but I'm going to try slideshow and see if it will work for me. Bear with me. Yeah, we're going to try this now, and again, I don't think it might not work. No, okay, that's fine. I'm going to just click out of that. So what I was going to show you, again, unfortunately, we have sometimes problems with technology, but the consent form has been created to the proper legal and ethical standard. So therefore, anybody working as a volunteer for the Diverse Waterford Oral History Project will be given the consent form, which will enable you to document properly, to have the consent form signed at the end of an interview, so that the person has given their commitment to the project and understands what's happening in the project. And ultimately, that's what ethics and legalities breaks down to. I mean, there are different elements which will be taught through training and support for anyone getting involved in this, but critically, it's about undertaking your work in an ethical way. And, you know, once you commit yourself to that, you know, both as an individual and particularly as a group or a project, then you rarely will run into trouble. If you're ethical from the start, if you work on the principle of informed consent, which means that you ensure people know what you're doing, then that should be sufficient to get you through with little enough difficulty. So just to go back very briefly towards the end now, just to give you a sense of the other material that we're looking at. Just bear with me. So yeah, okay, so just to briefly run through some more of this, you can see here 3 dimensions I wanted to bring up, and we're coming towards the end of the lecture. We're heading for the 28 minutes, so I've got to keep an eye on my time, but 3 dimensions, just to reassure you in terms of how your overall approach can inform an interview. There are 3 dimensions, I believe, to most interviews, and that will be the person. So who's the person you're going to interview? What about their background, any significant points of interest, their passions, the known stories that they are connected with, that they can tell, you know, their characteristics with regard to, you know, their background. Are they interested in, you know, painting? Are they interested in hurling? Are they interested in folk stories? You know, there'll be elements that will be known about the individual that are really important, the connections they may have to historical events or historical people or characters. And the more you know about that, the more you can inform the way in which you trigger the memories and you prompt stories that you know about. The place is also always going to be critical, particularly with the older generation. Even though they might not have always lived in the one place, they will generally be connected to one place. So the more you know about, if it is Lismore, you know, if it is, I've mentioned Villierstown a number of times in the recording so far. If you know more about those places, you can you can insert questions that relate to their experience and their knowledge, perhaps, of an event that happened in Lismore or wherever it might be. And then finally, the life is really important, because that opens up, you know, the period of experience that the person has had. Say, for example, from the age of 6, 7, 8, when they may have memories that are formed and are strong in their mind. And you parallel that. So if somebody's born in 1930, then they're going to be 10 years of age when World War II has kicked off, or 9 years of age when the emergency kicks off. So, you know, they've got strong memories from that experience of the emergency. And you can move that forward through, you know, the arrival of rural electrification, or, you know, whatever other landmarks are related to that period of time. And that's a really, you know, useful way of positioning yourself in the memory of the individual, and that will help to capture what is presented in front of you. Just a quote to finish up on, or to come towards the conclusion. The good collector, Sean O'Sullivan, who wrote the Handbook of Irish Folklore, Irish Folklore, says that the good collector then should be an opportunist, ready to take advantage of every chance to reap his or her harvest of lore. And what's really critical, I suppose, is that, you know, you, as the person watching who may decide to get involved with the Diverse Waterford Oral History Project, will have tremendous opportunities to sit in front of an old man, an old woman, and to listen, and to engineer the disclosures that can be so valuable, you know, both to you, to the person you're interviewing, to their family, to their community, and to the broader people of Waterford in general. You know, that there's so much you get back from that. I know myself personally, from having interviewed so many people, that I've been enriched personally so much by the opportunities to sit for hours in front of, you know, people, and to hear their stories, and to document their experiences. And that's really what makes up true history in a way, because, you know, we can have facts and we can have statistics that catalogue the historical experience, but unless you can attach that to the emotion, to the feeling of an event or an episode or a period of time, then really, you know, you're reading a phone book, to use a clumsy analogy. But by you committing to Diverse Waterford, by going out collecting according to a good standard and committing to learning, you will contribute something that's enduring. And that's not something that's easy to do in this life, but certainly you'll have that capacity to do it with Diverse Waterford. And I'll just make the final point in relation to, you know, who can be good oral historians, or, you know, how difficult is it to do it. Most people get, in my experience, preoccupied with the technology. And of course, you have to become good with the technology, whatever you might be using, a Zoom or an Olympus recorder or a video recorder. In general, the Diverse Waterford will work with audio recorders. But the natural skills of being curious, being interested, being a good listener, and being patient, being committed to spending time at this endeavor are the critical skills. You know, you can learn the technical skills, but if you have those natural abilities, then all of the other skills that are in the whole set of being an oral historian can be acquired. So it is certainly doable for anybody who is interested. Once you commit yourself to the approach, commit yourself to, as you say, a good standard of undertaking oral history, and the rewards are just remarkable. You know, and certainly it's a sad reality that they become much more, you know, acute, those rewards, when somebody passes away. And unfortunately, it's often only then, when somebody has passed away and you have, you know, had made the effort to document their memory, or part of their memories, of course. And, you know, often when you hand that back to the family, or your project, you know, hands it back to the family after a period of time, you know, that is, in a very strange way, one of the most rewarding moments, certainly in my life as an oral historian, because, you know, you've captured something for eternity. You know that the children, the grandchildren, even the great-grandchildren will have access to that memory and that voice, which is really, really important. And yeah, I think, look, there'll be much more made available through the Waterford City and County Libraries in relation to Diverse Waterford and the opportunities for people to get involved. It's an evolving project. There's much more work to be done on it at our end, but certainly we're at a position where we're encouraging people to learn more, to find out more. And of course, in COVID times, it has put challenges in front of oral historians, but the skills can still be acquired. The ability can be sharpened. And when we get to a point, whether it's through the use of remote recording or hopefully back to the face-to-face interviewing that we all know and love, then people in Waterford will be well set up to undertake that work and to create a resource that will be there for future generations and the current generation, of course, as well. So, Garmila Mahagwev as Kunde on Clár.